Hey there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. So today is going to be a continuation of the plant review series. You might be able to see the plant that I'm going to be talking about in front of me today, and this is the Scindapsus Moonlight. That took me a minute there. Scindapsus Moonlight, Moonshine, depends, I think I've seen it go by both names. And for the people that have been here before, as always, I will try to put chapters in. So down below, you'll see the chapters. Skip to the bit that you want to see, especially if you're thinking about getting this plant or have already got this plant. For the new people, welcome. And just to lay down some ground rules, as always, these reviews are based on my experience in my conditions within the care that I give the plants. I'm based in the UK. I've got a conservatory. It's got relatively high humidity and decent light. So I can talk about it from my experience. Obviously, for the people that are new here, if you've got the same plant and you've had it for a while and you want to share your review, that's the whole point. Please do down below. I'm hoping this will become a bit of a repository for reviews, a bit like you would get on Amazon, but for plants. I don't think there's anybody else online that's doing something similar to this. But I think that's enough of the kind of groundwork on this one. Let's move into the first topic. So coming into background for this plant, and let me bring this down, and as always, or at least as has been happening recently, I will try to add a B-roll at the end of the video. So if you want more of those kind of really cool close-ups, do check out the very end of the video as well. So let me try lifting it up. And you might be able to see the top of the plant looking very lush. Obviously, in my conditions, I've got top-down lighting because it's the conservatory, but you can see there, and you can see why it's called the Moonshine. It's not necessarily being picked up as well on the camera, but that lighter area that you're seeing there is kind of silvery, basically. And you can see that it is obviously a vining plant. And let me just put it back up. There we go. And for a very long period of time, I didn't actually have this vining from a hanging basket. I had it on a shelf and it was vining down. But talking about the background on this plant, it was a plant that I saw for a very long period of time online. And if I'm not mistaken, I have had this either 3 or 4 years. The title of the video will confirm this. And as always, I don't have space here, so I'll put it over the existing plant. I will show you a picture from my plant care app of what this plant looked like when I first got it. Now, it was one that I saw online many, many years ago. It wasn't particularly readily available in the UK, and I definitely wanted to get my hands on it. What happened was one of the local plant stores did get one in, and I went and picked it up from that local plant store, and I bought loads of stuff from that specific shop before. I didn't know an awful lot enough about that plant at that point. Not a lot of people had that plant yet, so there wasn't a lot written or even reviews of this plant and kind of how to care for it online. So I was kind of trying to figure it out as I went along. And I did have the Scindapsus argyraeus, which is obviously the same family, but its care was different, let's put it that way. Slightly different anyway. But the first plant that I got, and I should tell you, just to give you an indication there, the first plant that I got, which is no longer with, I think the picture that I would have shown you from the plant care app was of this plant when it was younger, not of that one, was relatively full plant. The soil media that it came in was horrendous. It was very, very dense cocoa coir and nothing else. So I think I remember for that plant, and it was getting decent light, it was getting artificial light. It was in a good condition. With this one, I'll bring it up again so you might be able to see. This is currently in a net pot in my aroid soil mix. But with that one, it was in its original pot, which I think was plastic, because it started struggling almost the day after I brought it into my house. I think I had it for 3 or 4 months. I think I watered it once, and I probably shouldn't have because it still wasn't fully dry. That tells you how bad that soil was in there. And yeah, it perished. I then found, I'm trying to think if it was the same shop. No, I think this one was from eBay. This was from an eBay seller. When that perished, I was just like, I was okay with that plant at that point. Did I really want one? Maybe, maybe not. But my stubbornness kicked in at that point. I'm just like, no, I will get this plant to survive and thrive in my care, whatever it takes, basically. So I did find it on eBay. I bought it. That's obviously the image that you would have seen when I first got it. I think it was a relatively full-ish small plant, but it was a full-ish small plant. And it has grown considerably since then. So yeah, that's kind of how it came into my care. And we'll touch on the soil thing as we go along. But I think that's enough of the background. Let's move into the next topic. So speed of growth for this one. And anybody who's got this will know why I'm laughing. Possibly one of my slowest growing plants, hands down, in my collection. Very, very slow growing. And I mean, it's done okay, but if you consider this plant is either 3 or 4 years old, you've seen some of my 2-year-old plants, and anybody who's got vining plants or trailing plants will know that given the kind of correct conditions, they can grow like crazy. And I think, granted, it's probably because of that silveriness of the leaves. Any kind of plant that I have that's got a silvery sheen to the leaf, depending obviously how much of that silver is there, generally will be a bit slower growing. If you've had good experiences and you've been able to get your silver plants to grow faster, or even this one specifically, do drop a comment down below. I'd be really interested. I think that some people may have cracked it. My understanding of kind of silvery plants would be that it almost reflects a bit of the light, so you can give it slightly brighter light. If you give it too low of a light, it's not as efficient at photosynthesizing. I might be wrong, but that's kind of how I've been playing it. But yeah, very, very slow growing. So again, I'll benchmark it as I always do with a pothos in these conditions. If a pothos in the summer will grow 2 or 3 leaves, and in the winter it might do 1 or 2 basically in here, this might grow a new leaf. I'm talking about a new leaf on each one of the vines. And granted, if you have a lot of vines, that's fine. But a new leaf might take 2 or 3 months. And there's another issue that then compounds how slow this can grow as well. And I'm going to be entirely frank with a lot of people, because it can be so slow growing, the usual trick that you might do with a pothos or a vining philodendron, like the philodendron hederaceum or the heart-shaped heartleaf philodendron, I think it's called, where you would chop some of it, propagate kind of single leaf cuttings to get and then put it back in the pot to get a bushier plant. Yeah, you can do it. Don't get me wrong, it will still potentially work. It takes a while, not only for this plant to grow, but also to root out from a rooted cutting. So yeah, but I think that's what I wanted to say now for speed of growth. Let's move on to the next topic. So the next topic I want to touch on is ease of propagation. And as I just mentioned a moment ago, yes, you can take a cutting, you can take a single node cutting with a leaf. I've tried also propagating this from a single, like a wet stick essentially, without a leaf, and it can happen. It takes even longer. So I think with a single leaf cutting, it did take a few months for it to root out and get to the point where it was growing again. And to be fair, none of the cuttings have ever gone back into this pot because they always just looked a bit weedy. But they were gifted to other people who've somehow managed to get them a bit bigger. But yeah, it is slow to propagate. It doesn't take much of a beating after you cut it before it starts growing again. It doesn't slow the mother plant down any more than it would normally be slow anyway. But yeah, it's on the face of it, yes, it propagates like most other vining things. It just takes a lot longer than most other vining plants. And yeah, I think that's something to bear in mind. I have propagated in water, it did okay. I've propagated in moss, it did okay. I've never done perlite or pond in terms of propagation with this. But those two things did okay. I kept the humidity high, gave it some decent LED grow lights as well. Relatively straightforward, but just the speed. But yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say about propagation. Let's move on to the next topic. So availability, and this is one that I touched on a moment ago in the beginning when I was talking about background, but let's dive into that a bit more. So when I first got this, it was, when I first got it, the first plant, I think was mid to high triple digits. The second plant, by that point, a few more had come into the market, and it was mid double digits. So first one, mid to low double digits. Second one, mid double digits, basically. And there was a reason why that happened at that point, because, and I saw a lot more people get the plants than, at least here in the UK, and I'm assuming some of Europe as well. I don't know if this was global, where there was an influx of them that hit the market at the same time. Scindapsuses were having a bit of a heyday around that time, so they were just like, oh, look, and it's a silver Scindapsus as well. So it did kind of flood the market. The problem was the same for most of it. The soil mix, and I think most of it probably came from growers in the Netherlands, and whether or not they had it in that kind of a soil mix because they wanted to water it really infrequently, maybe in the nurseries it was one of those plants that they kind of forgot because it's a slow grower, and they kind of let it have dense soil and then water it very, very infrequently because I would imagine it would make their lives a bit easier. But this caused a lot of heartache for a lot of people. And I think some people in America had similar problems as well around that time, that most people's original plants died off. They all kind of rotted away. And it was because so many people were they were doing the right thing. They were doing what everybody kept telling everybody to do, which was wait for a bit until the plant establishes itself and then move and then repot it, and then don't always get rid of all of the soil. I made a lot of those mistakes on my first one. And on my second one, I scrapped most of that reasoning. I just kind of went, right, you are coming out of whatever soil you are in. You are going into my light, airy, arrowed soil mix. You are definitely going into a net pot, not even a terracotta pot, because I know the net pot will dry out faster. And that worked like a charm. And I can still remember conversations that I had with other kind of collectors, basically, who got this, and they were really worried about it, and they were asking me, they're just like, what did you do? Because we know that some people were having problems. And I can remember very vivid conversations with them, and it was kind of almost paining them what I was telling them to do. And it did the same to me at that point, which was repot it as soon as you get it home. Get it out of whatever dense soil mix that is coming in from the nursery and get it into something else. And that's kind of roughly when I started doing that for more plants. So there is that kind of notion that you should wait to repot until after the plant has established itself in your home, because it's getting the first shock by coming into your home, and you don't want to kind of shock it again. I mean, the way, and I might be wrong in this, but my thinking with that is I'm stressing the plant by bringing it into my house. I'm letting it settle for a couple of weeks, and then I'm re-stressing it a couple of weeks later to repot it. It's getting stressed and stressed again, whilst at least if I'm bringing it in my house and repotting it, and again, I'm not necessarily encouraging everybody to do this. I've had good results with it. Repotting it as soon as I get it in generally to me means that the plant will bounce back from the stress faster than doing it staggered in the way that a lot of people suggest that you do it. And I've had some good successes with that. I don't think I have lost a plant just yet in that way. But there is the caveat there always that you might lose a plant by doing it that way. But this was one that did take quite well to that one. And it did take a beat regardless of the repot, regardless of it coming into my home. After the stress of it being moved, and this is a plant that is very sensitive to kind of drastic changes to its environment, and it will make it grow even slower, at least that's been my experience. It did take a beat to get going again, but it did eventually get going. But yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say. Oh no, that was in terms of availability. Pricing, I kind of talked about really briefly. In terms of what the market was like then and now. So the market then, as I said, there was an influx that came in. but there wasn't that many. I don't think a lot of people were aware of it. This Scindapsus is generally getting a bit of a heyday again at the moment. I think a lot more people are aware that this one isn't straightforward. I would still love the dark form of this, which is originally the plant that I wanted instead of the silver one. But, and I've done another video recently on the kind of this plant before, and I'll see if I can link it up at the top again. And I did have some good comments on there from other people that have had the dark form as well as this one, and they're just like, the dark one is even slower, which I kind of assumed. Most dark leaf plants tend to be a bit slower growing, but yeah, that kind of stopped me wanting the dark form of this one. Still think it's pretty, but just maybe not for me. But yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say on availability. Let's move on to the next topic. Right, pests for this one. And I will say this might only be relevant in my conditions. I'd be interested to see your experience if you've got this plant as well. Spider mites are not something that I've ever experienced on this plant. Mealybugs, however, and people that have been here around as well know that I've been dealing with mealybugs a lot in my conservatory for a while now. This has been the plant that most of the mealybugs will be attracted to generally, and there's a lot of nooks and crannies, and on the B-roll, and trigger warning if nobody wants to see a mealybug up close, maybe skip that part of the B-roll, but I'll see if I can get some close-ups, because I was looking at this plant just as I was putting it up to show you on the camera, and I'm trying to find it again now. Yeah, I can, just by a quick glance, I can see about 6 or 7 mealybugs on it. And to be clear, this got neem oiled most of winter. It got the rubbing alcohol spray most of winter. And it also got sprayed, hosed down with kind of pressure about a week ago, and they're back. Which might also imply that there is root mealybugs in here as well. I haven't repotted it because it's such a slow grower. I don't want to knock it back anymore. So there is that. But yeah, mealybugs for me on this plant have been the biggest thing. And I would say this is comparable for mealybugs to things like Hoyas. A lot of my Hoyas are also mealybug magnets, basically. And like Hoyas, this has lots of nooks and crannies that the mealybugs can hide. So even if you think you've got most of them, you've probably missed half of them. That's the reality with this plant. Granted, it never got to the point where it stunted the growth of this plant or even particularly slowed it down. I don't know. I mean, it was always slow even before it got mealybugs. It's still slow after mealybugs. Is it any slower after the mealybugs? But yeah, mealybugs for me have been the bane of my existence with this plant. And in all fairness, this is probably what infected a lot of the plants that were around it. This is another reason why it is now hanging and away from a lot of other things, basically. So it's not touching anything generally. But yeah, I think that's the big thing with this one in terms of pests. Otherwise, it's okay, pest-wise. Coming into the new kind of area of these reviews, which is accessories. And the only kind of accessories that I would say about this plant is I've never grown this up a plank or even a moss pole. You could. I would imagine the leaves would probably start to get a bit bigger. I did have this on support sticks at some point. That was fine. The leaves didn't get any bigger. It doesn't tend to want to attach too much, and I'll see if I can get some close-ups on the B-roll of the little aerial roots. They don't ever get particularly large, and they callus over. I've got no other way of describing it. Harden off basically really, really quickly. So possibly on a plank it might work okay. Definitely something like a net pot has been key for this one. I've also attached some horrendous, and I'll show you, horrendous, you know, those kind of metal covered, plastic covered metal plant ties that I generally won't use for most of my plants, but I've attached that to the actual net pot itself in order to make it a hanging pot. And an aroid soil mix 100% for this. You need this to be as light and airy. You want this to be fully fully drying out as much as possible. Very similar to the Scindapsus argyraeus or the satin pothos, technically not a pothos. I will try and wait until these leaves start to curl up a bit before I water. So that soil might be dry for a while basically, but they don't tend to use up their water very quickly at all. So that's why I would say make the soil as light and fluffy and airy as possible. You want it to be drying out relatively quickly. As I said previously, this is a plant that I found can go towards rot quite quickly. So anything you can do to stop that from happening is a good thing. In terms of fertilizing with this one, I would say I do it every second watering in the summer and maybe once a month in the winter, but it doesn't make a difference to the speed of growth. it is what it is. Moisture meter would probably be good for this one, just to double make sure that even if the leaves have started curling, because they could do that as well even if there's root rot, not just because it's dry and it needs water. Always, always, always check the soil before you water this plant. You don't want to have gotten root rot, assume that it's dry, water it, and make the root rot worse. But yeah, I think those are the big things that I would say in terms of accessories for this plant. Moving on to final thoughts. And I think some of you may have already guessed where this is likely to go. So I'll start with the usual one that I always do, which is knowing what I know now, and if I didn't have this plant, would I purchase this plant? No, absolutely not. For the sheer trouble that it gives me and how slow growing it is, no, I just wouldn't. I would much rather spend my money somewhere else. There are a lot more interesting Scindapsuses that are coming. Previously, I would have said maybe I would have gone for the dark form, but knowing now that the dark form is even slower than this one, I'm just not living that life, basically. Moving on from that, in terms of the score from 0 to 10, 0 being the worst, 10 being the best, maybe a 1 or a 2 on this one. Maybe I probably wouldn't go as far as saying a 0. There's another plant that I would probably give a 0 to. But very, very low score for this, which is interesting because it's a Scindapsus. And for most people, their first experience of a Scindapsus will be something like a satin pothos, which is generally, and at least I found this as well, I think with most people, a relatively easygoing plant. No. High maintenance, slow. Yes, the leaves can be beautiful. Do they dull down a bit? I found that they do as well. So at least in my experience, you will never get it to be as silvery as you get it when you first buy it, especially if it's come from a nursery. That's been my experience with this one. Don't come for me if it isn't for everybody, basically. Do let me know down below, though. But yeah, and I haven't done, this is the first kind of negative review that I've done for a plant, but if you've stayed and watched the whole video and you got to this stage and you're thinking about getting this, make absolutely sure that you're comfortable with some of the negative things that I've said about this plant during this review. Hopefully other people will also comment down below so you're not just getting my opinion, because I never want to necessarily poo-poo on a plant. But yeah, this, for me, it wasn't worth it, basically, for what you get for the plant and for how much hassle and how slow it is. But on that happy, cheery note, I think I might let you go for the day. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.